Welcome to another episode of the Dan Norton Show. Today, I am here with Teddy Carney. I met Teddy through Facebook, as I've met many of my viewers or followers. And Teddy wrote to me and said he was interested in having a conversation about some things. So, Teddy, welcome to the show.
Hey, Dan, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Sure thing. So we talked a little before we started officially recording here about what we were going to discuss, but why don't I just throw it over to you and you can tell me and our audience what you want to talk about. You don't have to say everything. You could just raise one topic if you'd like to start, one that you're interested in starting with, however you want to do it.
Yeah, okay. Sounds good. So I guess the way I'll
Just
start.
one thing. I
Oh, yeah.
forgot to mention to the audience. I'm wearing sunglasses because it's very bright outside. Usually I'm in a more shady place when I record these episodes. So sorry if it's weird that I'm wearing sunglasses, but for various reasons, this is the best spot for me to be right now. So I'm wearing shades. So all right, let me give it back to you, Teddy. Go ahead.
Okay. Um, yeah, so I guess the way I'll start it off is that even before I found objectivism, it seemed like, in a lot of movies and stuff like that, you'll see, if the story revolves around someone being a slave, right? Or like a society being enslaved or something like that, it seems like the heroes, right? Even like Braveheart, right? It's like it's all about freedom, right? Like freedom is the most important thing. And people, are like, oh, it's not really living if you're not free, right? And freedom's everything. And then as I look at like kind of our society, it seems like the farther we get into a society, right, and the more technologically advanced and the more people there are, it seems like no matter where I look, freedoms seem to kind of shrink, right? And like the essence of freedom becomes less important than some things like safety or comfortability, right? So I wanted, I guess, to ask you, when do you think it begins to where people kind of start feeling more comfortable giving up freedoms in exchange for really anything, really? It probably seems like it's small at the start, right? Um, but then as I'm sure you understand that, as soon as you give government something, it just kind of keeps going and going. So when do you think it kind of starts?
The erosion of freedom, or I mean, I think
Yeah.
one of the things you're bringing up, and it's getting back to some of the stuff we were talking about before we were officially were recording. Um, I think maybe you're picking up on a kind of tribal mentality, which has become more prominent over the last few years, and people might say things that nominally sound good. I'm for freedom. I mean, pretty much everyone will say I'm for freedom. Who's going to deny that? But then when it gets down to concrete issues, you start to question: is someone really in favor of freedom? Like one thing that comes to mind is Social Security or Medicare. Like people on the right, the so-called rights, I think those terms can be misleading sometimes. They fancy themselves to be pro-freedom, but is a program like Social Security or Medicare really compatible with that? I don't think it is, because these are programs you're forced to contribute to. And I think freedom and force are opposites. Yet many people on the right, I don't think want to give up these programs. So they're not really in favor of freedom, even though they might give lip service to it. So, but you're asking about something more specific, maybe. When does that start? I mean, I don't know that they ever had a concept of freedom to begin with. So they might have some vague notion of freedom that seems good, but they never really understood the principle of freedom. And this is not necessarily to fault them, because I don't think our culture is taught very well what freedom really means. I think many people don't understand it, and they just have some kind of vague, woozy notion of freedom, uh, but they don't really understand the principle of freedom, which I guess John Locke is the main originator of. He didn't have it perfectly. He thought God played a role in uh, humans having rights, and whereas, on my view, on Ayn Rand's view, there is no God. So he didn't have a full conception of rights and freedom, but he made a a big leap forward, and I think Ayn Rand uh, further increased understanding of rights. But I think most people, they don't really understand the nature of individual rights and freedom. They just have kind of a woozy emotional um, uh, feel about it, positive feel, but concretely they don't know how to implement that. So I don't know that it's an issue of, when do people start losing the notion of freedom? When does it erode? It might be partly they never had it to begin with. So I'm not sure if that addresses this sort of question you were asking, but I've been going on for a while, so let me just throw it back to you. And
No, that was actually a really good answer, because now that I think about it, especially reading Ayn Rand and kind of knowing what it's about, it seems like, you are probably right, where it's just, um, do you think that, how am I trying to say this? Do you think that, based on like our history, right? How like the U.S. was founded and everything, like you said, even though they might not have gotten it right, not to fault them. Do you think like a society has to reach a certain point like really understand what freedom is and then implement it, like, or do you think it's possible to like maybe do that from the get-go, or is there like a certain amount of time that has to pass, um to where people are sufficiently free in some way to really understand what it is and maximize freedom in a certain way, or do you think it's not possible, or?
to reach like a society where people embrace and endorse freedom. um
Yeah. Sorry, let me just clarify what I guess I'm trying to say. So like primitive humans, right? Like especially for like really early people, right? Like religion, it makes sense how they came up with it, right? Like it makes sense, how power was kind of like the most important thing, right? And how, feudalism was created. Like everything in human history kind of like makes sense, right? But then we reached a point where like um strength kind of seemed to matter less and less with like technology, right? Like being a big strong man or whatever, like doesn't really, not a lot of people are working in the fields anymore for farming, and stuff like that. And like it seems like after a certain amount of time, um the mind becomes more important. And when the mind becomes more important, you kind of like start to understand that like the freer the mind is, the better, right? And after a certain point, do you think it'll like take over, or do you think that that string of thought just won't ever like fully take hold?
hmm. So you're painting a narrative where historically it started out with human beings where strength or physical power was very important, and then over time the mind or mental powers became more important. And
Yeah, yeah,
I guess there's a well, one question is like, is that, was it always like that? Like, I mean, the I guess it makes sense that we started out in a more physical, brutish kind of way of survival, and then over evolutionary time, because that's all we had. We just had our muscles and the best that um, evolution could program into us, but our minds developed over time to be more and more powerful. Um, but we didn't always know how to use our minds. I mean, that's an achievement, um, to figure out how to use your minds in a way that advances your survival. Um, so, I mean, humans have been around for I don't know how long, where you would date it, but certainly long before someone like Aristotle came along, of course, and he's the one who discovered logic and much about how the mind works, how we understand the world. Um, but he was only what 25 or 2400 years ago. Um, but humans had been around for thousands and thousands, maybe millions of years before that. Um, but they hadn't discovered how to think correctly. Um, and there's been much that's been discovered since the time of Aristotle, even. So it's an achievement to figure out how you use this very powerful survival tool that we have, or a conceptual consciousness. That's what makes us radically different from other animals. They're largely perceptual. They don't have the capacity to think in abstract terms, like we do, and but that's what makes humans super powerful compared to other species. Um, so we've had this tool for thousands and thousands of years, but we haven't really figured out how to use it in a way that advances our survival, um, until, well, I mean, I think many people still don't understand how to use it very well, and they embrace things like faith, believing things without evidence. Um, take a pretty simple example of a misuse of the mind. That's basically throwing out your mind. I think when you go by faith, you're not going by your irrational faculty. Um, so it's an achievement to figure out how to use this survival tool that we have, and it's an ongoing process of education that needs to happen. People need to be taught um, how to use their minds, how to think, and I think objectivism plays a big part in that. I think Ayn Rand has discovered a lot about how humans need to think and act in order to successfully survive. But many people are unaware of her ideas, or they are, but they actively oppose them. Um, so those are a few initial thoughts on uh, the sort of thing you were discussing, although I'm not sure, again, it directly addresses what you were asking. But let me throw it back to you and see what you have to say.
Yeah, no, that was good. I didn't format my question super succinctly either way, but that was actually pretty much exactly what I was looking for. So no, that thank you for that. I have another question I was wondering you could hopefully maybe shed some light on, which is um I'm a big fan of like watching debates online, right? And there's like a lot of people that I watch from differing points of view. But it seems like among them, regardless of kind of where they stand, it seems like every person, regardless of their political stance, kind of believes that a certain curb of freedom is necessary to preserve one thing or the other, or to create one thing or the other, right? Where I mean, even the people that I was arguing with on that Facebook thread, right? They were arguing that it's okay to force people to pay things or for things that had nothing to do with them because it's better for the society as a whole if you know public schools exist, right? Or we take care of children, right? Like childcare, right, and stuff like that, outside of the parents. And I was wondering why do you think people feel comfortable curbing freedoms for certain things, and then when it comes to things that they like, um, then all of a sudden like freedom becomes like the most paramount thing, right? So like for an example, I think one of the people there said that abortion was really wrong because it curbed like the freedom of the mother, right? And it didn't give them a choice, and that making drugs illegal were bad because it should be people's choice. But then they were in favor of, governmentally funded childcare or schooling, right? So why do you think it's easy for people to do that with things that they almost arbitrarily seem to just be important to them, and then if something isn't important to them, freedom doesn't matter?
Yeah. Just for the audience's context, so you referenced the Facebook thread. So a little while ago, uh, Teddy was debating on Facebook, and this is something I do a lot of. I'll post comments on Facebook, and I guess one of your recent debates, these sorts of issues came up. So why is it that um, people are kind of selective about about when they endorse freedom? They're okay with freedom in some areas, like maybe with getting an abortion, but not in other areas. Like people should be forced to provide childcare or pay taxes so that other people can have funds to pay childcare. Why isn't there more consistency? Uh, I mean, I think part of this might just go back to the point I was making before, which is that they don't really understand the principle of freedom. And I guess they sense on some level it's good, but they they haven't been taught all of its applications, and it's not necessarily obvious what all the applications of freedom are, or what all the implications of freedom are. There might be some evasion going on as well. So it's not necessarily a simple or straightforward answer for everybody. It might vary from person to person. Maybe some people, they just haven't considered the implications of freedom in various areas. Um, so it could just be ignorance to some degree. But maybe there's also some tribalism going on, where they they have this feeling that they want to belong to this group of people, and this group doesn't approve of certain things like freedom in childcare, or maybe many people don't approve of having no taxes at all. They think there should be taxes to support things like childcare or medical care. And maybe some people just they don't feel comfortable going against that dominant view. This is definitely a majority viewpoint that people should be forced to pay for things. So it could, maybe there's some fear involved. Also, I think when you put it in certain ways, like should people be forced to pay for things, to make it clear what's going on, that people are being forced, I think they can become more reluctant to go along with that. So if you say should people be forced to pay for things, they'd be less likely to say yes than if you say, is it good for people to have childcare? That sounds good, right? Who's going to be against childcare or healthcare? These are great things. Don't we want people to have that? Well, yeah, unless unless it involves looting other people. So a lot of what I try to do in these debates is make clear what the implications of their views are. So if you frame things in certain ways, they can seem much better than they are. And framing often leaves out important things. So a lot of what I try to do in online debates is reframe things, bring things to the surface, put a spotlight on things, make explicit things that are just kind of woozy or in the background, not being paid attention to, but that are relevant. And if they were brought into the forefront of people's attention, they would have or at least more likely would have a different view of them. At least it's not going to be as obvious that childcare is a good thing if it's clear that that involves forcing people or looting from people. I always often use terms like that. So I don't know that there's a simple answer to your question as to why people are pro freedom in some areas but not others. But those are some of the considerations I think that might go into explaining it. And just
Gotcha.
to okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Just to kind of recap that in a bit more concise form. So I think some of it could be evasion, which might be motivated by fear of being ousted by some tribe they belong to, informally tribe, not like an official tribe.
Right.
But maybe there's also just ignorance on some people's part, and they just haven't been taught that freedom requires certain things, and here's a bunch of implications of freedom, applications of it in various areas. I think most people aren't taught that. So I don't think it's very surprising that people don't have a consistent, principled understanding of freedom. Most people, I don't think, have ever been exposed to that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, good answer. I appreciate that. Okay. I guess I'll switch it up on you a little bit. I have a kind of a less, I don't know, esoteric question for you and more of like a specific thing. I'm not sure how much you know about this is gonna seem like a out of nowhere question. I'm not sure how much you know about Taiwan. But like I've just like recently kind of like found out about Taiwan and what's going on with it, right? And my girlfriend and I were like looking at it, and it looks like when you see like a country like Taiwan who's like actively struggling to remain independent and not be taken back over by China, who's like the worst in my opinion. Um, and like Taiwan has, I mean, I'm looking at it right now, like 94 out of 100 for like freedom, right? Like they have great political rights and civil liberties, and they're relatively new, like when it comes to their independence, right? And it seems like this is like a heroic country, right? Who's like standing up to someone like an authoritarian government who wants to take them over. And they have a lot of like personal freedoms, economic freedoms, from what I can tell. And like there's polls, right, where the Taiwanese people are polled like, do you like China or do you like the US? And it's like 85% of them like the US, or at least, like the idea of the US. And it seems disheartening to me, as someone in the US, to see a Chinese country essentially, or whose people are Chinese, um, kind of being the country that it seems like, at least ideally, I thought the US was, like it seems like Taiwanese people are striving to be more free, be more independent. And young people, like the idea of freedom. And then I look at polls in the US, right, especially around my age group, where people seem to be, especially my age group, like socialism more, right? They don't like capitalism. They don't like freedom, right? They don't mind taking away freedoms for things, especially if that's in their political spectrum. So I guess I guess I'm asking you for like why do you think, like, can you give me like a beacon of hope as to like why you think the US, is like still, really good, or like why, is it like a lost cause, or like just what's your opinion on the US as a whole, as like I don't know, like Taiwan is like a, measuring stick for, a new country kind of doing what I think we should be doing.
Oh man, there's a lot there. I don't have much knowledge of Taiwan specifically, but I have noted the kind of thing you're talking about, where it seems like other people and people in other countries are more patriotic than the U.S. are for the U.S. Like Hong Kong is another case that comes to mind, where you see them waving these American flags as part of their protest against China. And I remember seeing some commentary online about how they seem more like they don't really know what's going on in the US because there's so much erosion of freedom going on here. Like, but what they take us to stand for is freedom. And I mean, to a significant degree, I think there is still freedom in the US, but it's definitely under attack. I mean, in some ways, I think it's gotten better in terms of freedom, like racially. I guess there's more freedoms for people of any race now than there were before, like in the Jim Crow days or slavery. True, of course. Yeah. So there has been progress there. Or maybe the treatment of gays. I don't know what kinds of legal freedoms they lacked before, or if they did, but it seems like there's more. I'm not sure if that's a good example, but women maybe is another example. Increased freedom for women in terms of right to votes. So there has been progress in some ways in the U.S., but I think there's also been retrogression, backsliding in other ways. So I think economically, we're much less free in important ways than we were in the 19th century, late 19th century, when there was little or no taxes, and all these regulatory agencies, FDA, FCC, SEC, and all the alphabet agencies didn't exist in the 19th century. And I think they've eroded freedom. So it's gotten worse in some important ways. And I guess, you know, in every country has its own dynamic. So I know, like, China was, you know, very anti-freedom under Mao, and then they liberated somewhat, I guess, in the 70s, after post Mao. They started to liberate a bit, and I don't know all the ups and downs, but I think in general it had been getting better. Although there was the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989, which I think is still covered up by the Chinese. I think so, yeah. Yeah, I was talking to someone recently, someone from China. She didn't even know about it. I had to tell her about Tiananmen Square. This is just someone I met online.
Jeez, yeah.
And she was Chinese, but she didn't know about Tiananmen Square. So, and I think I've heard that it's got, from Yaron Brook, actually, I listen to his show fairly often. He talks about how China has gotten worse over the last few years. So it's, I mean, so maybe other places in, you know, there, I don't know what's going to happen when in Hong Kong, if they're, I mean, they were, I don't follow very closely what goes on in these places, but so you were asking for like why is it that people in these other countries like Taiwan, or maybe we can add in Hong Kong, are more pro-freedom than they are in the US? Maybe some of it has to do with the intellectuals that are kind of the main voices in the US. I mean, in the US, the universities are, I think they're largely leftists, Marxist even, um, in their political orientation. And that's kind of the ideas that so many people are taught. And then those ideas, I mean, a lot of people in the media who went to the universities, I guess that's where they pick up a lot of their leftism. And so the media is also very leftist, at least in terms of like the newspapers or cable news. I mean, there are exceptions like Fox, which maybe is bad in a different way. I haven't followed them closely, but I think they've become they become pro-Trump. That's my sense from the very little I don't watch them much, but from what I hear about them and the little that I see clips now and then, they seem pro-Trump. So, and I don't think that's a very good alternative. I think it's a bad alternative to the left. But it's another tribe that's out there. So why is it that people in the US are less pro-freedom than people in Hong Kong or Taiwan? I mean, I don't know that that's the case, actually, that they are less. I just because I mean, maybe they are, but I just don't know enough about the people of Hong Kong or Taiwan.
Yeah, I mean, I don't either, right? Like, obviously, I don't live there or anything, but it just, at the very, at least on the surface, right? It seems like the ideals of both Hong Kong and Taiwan, are both like, pro freedom, right? Like that's almost like all they stand for, like their main thing, right? And then maybe it's just because I'm young and I'm, kind of looking at it with a fresh set of eyes, and but like it doesn't really seem like there's a lot going on in the U.S. that's really like pro freedom at all, right? Like almost every like big political movement has almost nothing to do with freedom, right? And when it is, it's kind of like in a misguided way. Um, and I don't know, it just seems kind of strange to like be living in the US, right? And like freedom is supposed to be, at least I thought, one of our main things, and then it, a lot of the things that we are fighting for seem like at the very best like a diluted form of freedom, right? And then you see places like Hong Kong and Taiwan, and it's like the purest form of freedom like possible, where they're like under actual threat, of like not being free, right? So
Well, I mean, one thought I had is maybe so if they are more pro-freedom, which may very well be, I mean, you see them waving these flags and not burning flags, American flags. Maybe it's because they see up close and personal the nature of anti-freedom. So if they're being very close to the Chinese governments and having to deal with that menace, they can value freedom, or they're more inclined to value freedom. They don't take it for granted as much because they see what happens when you don't have it in a way that's less obvious to people who are living in the US, where freedom is not as much under threat, at least not in the way or to the extent it is from people in that people face in Hong Kong or Taiwan. So maybe that's part of the reason. Another example that comes to mind is like Cuba. Like if you live in Cuba and you've risked your life, you've come to Miami, you've risked getting eaten by sharks or whatever to cross the water. Those people who've seen communism or socialism firsthand, they've lived in it, they they will appreciate freedom more than people who have lived a more insulated life in the US, and they don't they might be exposed to these rosy pictures of what socialism is or communism, but they haven't actually experienced it, and so they're more open to it. So maybe that's part of what would explain why people in these other countries have a more pro-freedom attitude. Um, so immigrants, you might say, have a more pro-freedom attitude, at least some immigrants, than native people, born in America.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good point. Yeah, I
But
didn't
I
think
think
about it.
you were raising some other points as well in your last when you were speaking before. I'm not sure if I addressed the point you were raising just before.
No, that pretty much, yeah, pretty much hit what I was looking
Okay.
for. Um, yeah, no, I guess it's you made some good points too. I guess I may have gotten a little sometimes it's hard to look at like the overall state of the US and maybe not get depressed sometimes if you're looking at it from like a freedom angle. But what you brought up with like you know, rights for certain groups of people, right, becoming better, it's not like it's all bad. So I guess I should keep that in mind too, for sure. Um, but yeah. Um, no, thanks. That was a really good answer.
There's
I
certain areas like I think the tech world has been quite free. I mean, there's so much innovation that's gone on in Silicon Valley, um, which we benefited from, or Zoom technology, which we're using right now. So in that area, which has been very free and unregulated, there's been tremendous progress. But in other areas, um, like healthcare, that are very regulated, I think that there hasn't been nearly as much progress, and maybe things have gotten worse in some ways. Um, so I mean, there have been some improvements, like plastic surgery, for example, which maybe 50 years ago was a very, very rare thing, but I think it's become much more common, um, or cosmetic surgery. Um, and I mean, these vaccines that have been produced in record time, the COVID vaccines, that's progress. Um, so there have been some improvements, even in the medical healthcare areas, but there's still a lot more improvement that needs to happen. It's not nearly as good as I think it could be if it were more free.
right. Yeah. No, I that makes sense for sure. Um, yeah. Okay. Well, I had one last thing I kind of wanted to talk to you about. Do we have time? Is that all
Yeah.
right? Okay. Um, one thing I wanted to ask is I don't really know that much. I have like a vague understanding, but I don't really know that much about how Ayn Rand or objectively objectivism in general um, talks about really like art or media, like forms of entertainment, anything like that. Um, but sometimes when I'm not sure if you've seen the Joker, but Yaron Brook did like a movie analysis of the Joker, and even though I thought it was pretty good, like he kind of went on maybe like a morally based kind of like rant about like how movies like that really aren't good and they don't show like heroic sides of people. They show just like people giving into like rage, right, and stuff like that. And I guess I wonder like what's like your opinion, or how do you think like Ayn Rand kind of felt about like forms of art, right? Like I kind of got like the feeling that modern art is kind of not good in like an objectivist kind of eye, and like like Greek classical art and stuff like that is better. But I'm just not really sure like why or how we should kind of like view art and entertainment and even things like music.
Well, she wrote a book, a collection of essays called the Romantic Manifesto, which is the main source I would recommend to learn about her view of art. She talks a lot about literature. I think a philosophy of literature or something like that might be the subtitle of the book. But she talks about other art forms as well, but I think just not as much. So I would recommend that. And she does talk some about various schools of art historically. I don't recall what she says about Greek art, or if she addresses it. She probably says at least a little about it. But yes, modern art, I don't think she even considered art. I mean, if we're talking about things like a Jackson Pollock painting where it's just splatters of paints
Right.
on a canvas, it didn't even rise to the level of being art. It was like anti-art. It was, and I think she considered it nihilistic because it was just trying to destroy what was good about art. So in her view, art is a selective recreation of reality. That's part of her definition of what art is: a selective recreation of reality according to an artist's metaphysical value judgments. I think that's the full definition, which so it packs in various things there. But I guess something like Pollock is very non-selective, and it's not really a recreation of reality. I mean, what is that?
Right.
It's not a stylized version of something you might encounter in reality. Like her heroes in her novels, you might think they're very stylized, streamlined versions of human beings. And they're portrayed in such a way that, like Howard Rourke, for example, in the Fountainhead, he really embodies independence and integrity. But what is something like a bunch of paint smears embody? Or is it just meaningless? Is it just kind of mocking the art form? Is it a way of saying, like, let me see what I can get away with here? Or anti-tonal music, like, to take another art form where it's just screeches of sound. So I think she considered modern art to be nihilistic and not really art. Uh, Something like the Joker. I haven't seen the Joker, so I can't really comment on that. But it, I think that may be. I don't think it's not art if it's a movie. I mean, if it was just like a blank screen for 2 hours, I think that might be an example of maybe nihilism
Right.
in movies. But if it's got a story, there's some kind of plot, um, um, some kind of theme. It could be an art. She might not like it, but I don't know that she would say it's not art. I would have to know the film better.
Right. Yeah, I was just giving that as an example, but yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, I mean, you answered it. I was just kind of curious as to what, maybe I should be looking out for, or just kind of thinking about when I, look at things like that. But yeah, no, that was a good answer. Okay. Yeah. Cool.
So was that a recent? I don't remember Yaron Brooks' discussion of the Joker. Was that
Yeah,
a while
I,
ago?
I think Joker maybe have been like 1 or 2 years ago it came
Okay.
out. But it was a fairly recent film. But yeah, I mean, just to give you a brief like little thing, basically it's just about a guy who like is kind of like a loser in life, right? And he's kind of like a nice guy, but like in the movie there's like these big like rich guys that are like mean to him, right? And he basically just like snaps and kills people, and like is like, when a society is bad to people like me, like the losers, then the losers are gonna kind of rise up. And you know like it's kind of like a tragic story, but it doesn't really, it's, I guess morality is that like if people are treated badly, it's okay to like snap and kill people, right? And stuff like that to like punish the society, right? Because he killed like innocent people that were just like mean to him, like they didn't do anything worth of like getting killed for, and stuff like that. So
Hmm.
I think it was more like the morality of the movie that he was kind of judging and stuff like that. um
Mm.
but yeah, so I just had never really experienced an art critique in my life, like I had never really done anything with like any sort of philosophy that like talked about like how you should think about media and stuff like that. My view, because I'm pretty young, has just been kind of like it's all subjective, and if you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't.
Mm. Have you read the Romantic Manifesto or heard of
No,
that?
I actually have it. I have it next to my bed, along
Oh.
with like 8 others of her books, that I'm trying to get through,
Hmm.
but I haven't gotten to it yet. So
Yeah, there's a lot in there that I think might be useful for you. I think it's a great book, and like so many of her books, I learned a tremendous amount from. So yeah, I definitely recommend that for anyone who'd like to get a better understanding of art, um, and the meaning of art and its significance for human beings. And I mean, she has a definite. So she considered herself a romantic realist. I think that was the school that um, her own art would be classified under. But I think her book gives you an understanding of uh, art in general, not just that school of art. Um, so I think it's valuable, whether you you happen to like her school of art or other schools of art, or maybe both. In any case, I think there's a lot to learn from that book about
yeah.
art.
Well, who's that guy that she really likes? It was like the romanticism guy, didn't he? He wrote like The Hunchback of Notre Dame or something like that. What?
Victor Hugo.
Yeah, Victor Hugo.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was her favorite novelist, I believe, or maybe author. And I think more than anyone else, as an artist, I think she was inspired by Hugo's work. And she discusses him somewhat in the Romantic Manifesto. And Shoshana Milgram, she's given lectures at objectivist conferences about Hugo's work. 93, I think that's another one. Les Miserables, uh, uh, maybe some others as well. But yeah, Hugo was a big influence on Rand's, and maybe part of what inspired her to become a novelist. I haven't read Hugo's works. I love to, but I haven't, so I can't say much myself about him. But I know he was part of the Romantic school of art.
Right. Okay. Um.
There's
Yeah.
also
No.
a chapter in Leonard Peikoff's book on objectivism, the philosophy of Ayn Rand. The very last chapter in that book is on art, and I think that's another very good source to understand her views of art.
Is that what people refer to as OPAR?
Yeah, Opar.
Okay. Yeah. Because I saw some people say OPAR, and I had no I had no idea what that was. But yeah, no, I looked it up, and just another thing to add to my collection of things to learn about. But Yeah, no, I mean, thanks for your time and everything like that, Dan. I actually, now I'm thinking about it, I have one quick last thing.
Sure.
I guess it's just a little bit of advice to ask from you. I have maybe like one or two friends that were sufficiently what's the word, like malleable enough, I guess, politically and idealistically to kind of listen to me about objectivism. Um, and I don't want to. Have you ever wanted to like get someone to like a movie series or like a TV show, and you're like, oh, the best way to look at it is like this one episode, but you don't want to like start them off on the wrong foot where you don't like them, right? Or where they don't like it and stuff like that. I was wondering, like, what would you do if, or like, what have you done? What would you recommend I start someone off with? Like a video or like a book, or what do you think is like a good way to kind of introduce someone to objectivism besides just going through me?
Mhm. Well, the first thing I ever read was Philosophy Who Needs It. That's a collection of nonfiction essays, and the first essay in there is called Philosophy Who Needs It, and that's the title of the book as well. Uh, I think that's a great essay to start with. Uh, most people, they read the fiction first. I read the nonfiction first. That's just what I was most interested in. I didn't want to go through his whole story. I wanted to get straight to the philosophy. I was already interested in philosophy before I ever read Ayn Rand. So for me, at least, I think the nonfiction was a good way to go. But it varies for different people. Some people would be more interested in starting with fiction, and um, Anthem, I think, might be a good place for many people to start because it's short. It's not a huge commitment. I mean, Alice, that's a big book,
Yeah,
very
that's a
long.
huge book.
Fountainhead is long too, and I think it's it's a big time commitment, much more so than Anthem, which you can just read in a few hours. Uh, so that was actually the first fiction I read by Rand. Um, so if time is an issue, I think Anthem might be a good place to start if the person is more interested in fiction. If nonfiction, I think Philosophy Who Needs It may be the best. That talk was actually intended for a general audience. So it was a speech he gave to the cadets at West Point, the graduating class, I think, in 1974. And so these weren't objectivists, whereas a lot of her her nonfiction writing what came out in periodicals that were for subscribers to her magazine, The Objectivist, or the Objectivist newsletter. So it already presupposed some familiarity and interest with her ideas, but Philosophy Who Needs It was designed for someone who had no backgrounds. So that might be a good place to start for many people who are coming to Rand for the first time.
Gotcha. Okay.
I mean, there's a lot of videos online on YouTube, but in terms of her writing, those are some of the things I would recommend to start with. The lexicon also is I think it's a powerful source, the Ayn Rand lexicon. So this is a mini encyclopedia which was compiled by Harry Binswanger. So it's got quotes from excerpts from Ayn Rand's writings all collected together. So if you want to see what did she say about abortion, well, there's an entry in there on abortion, and it's got some quotes. Or what did she say about capitalism, or Aristotle, or whatever. So
Right.
if someone is just interested in random topics, or if you are, what did she have to say about X? I think the Ayn Rand lexicon is a good place to go, and that's available free online. So those are
Okay.
some
Yeah.
some resources.
Yeah. I mean, that's good for me too. I didn't know about that. So, yeah. No, I appreciate that. No, I think you. Yeah, I'll definitely. I typed it into my computer right now. So, yeah. No, but
When did you first read Rand?
oh, I only like realistically only like a year ago, maybe a little bit more.
Okay.
So, I
How did
mean,
you discover Rand?
well, it was. I first probably found out about it was kind of like a slippery slope. My dad, who's a who likes Ayn Rand, but it is kind of a little bit more of like a libertarian, introduced me to libertarianism, right? And he was like, "Oh," he was telling me capitalism is good, freedom is good. Have you ever read Ayn Rand? And I think Atlas Shrugged is one of his favorite books of all time. So he has a library. He showed me it. I kind of just started to learn more about it. And then I think one day I typed in objectivism into YouTube, and it was the Dave Rubin and Yaron Brook interview.
Mhm.
Um, that was good. And then I found Yaron Brook's channel where he has like he has like a series called Yaron Answers, and it's like little 3 to 10 minute videos about like all these different topics. And man, as a young guy, like the 3 minute videos, they really get me. Like
Mhm.
the attention span wasn't quite there for me at the time. So I started watching more and more videos the more I got into it. Um, and then longer videos and things like that. So I guess that's how I got started. So I have my dad to thank for that, I suppose. But
Okay. Yeah, I know the that Dave Rubin interview got a lot of attention. I think that's one of the most popular videos he's done, and I think he got a lot of subscribers out of it too.
yeah, that's what he said. Yeah, because I saw you're on, and he came up to Michigan State, um, and I saw him, and it was really cool, and he was talking about that. So but again, I really really appreciate this, Dan. This actually helped me out quite a
Sure.
bit. So
Happy
yeah,
to do it. So, thanks for proposing the idea. Glad we could
yeah,
have this chat.
yep. No, thank you.
All right. Well, have a great rest of your weekend, and
Yeah,
I guess I'll be seeing you online.
yeah, yep. You have a good one too, Dan. Thanks again. Have a good one.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye.
If you'd like to support more videos like this in my work of advancing Ayn Rand's ideas more generally, you can help by liking, subscribing, sharing, and becoming a contributor on Patreon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.